Hi, it's the Forest Daughter, Creel, and I thought I would share you a page from this fall of just journaling so you get an idea of how some people would use their journals. I like journals with a lot of pages, so a lot of writing space. And here's an example of what can be done. Now I've used a mix of pencil and pen and a brown pen, and I have used a mix of script and print. If you choose to do this, be wary. Any of your offspring and grandkids, if you plan to keep your journals, will probably not be able to read script or cursive. But it does look neat to have a different style of printing. So this page I put together today on some tea-dyed paper. It's a little piece of decorative paper, some washi tape, a stamp, and one of my coins that are made by gluing pieces of paper and a slender piece of cardboard together and then coating them with polyurethane matte varnish. So they have kind of a clinky sound. And then I just put one link of chain through the page and it dangles. The back is a green pattern. So this one says Tuesday, October 29th, 2024. It started overcast and cool. Now at 12:30 p.m. it is sunny, windy, and unseasonably warm. It is 78 degrees Fahrenheit. The leaves are blowing on the trees. Their colors have been gorgeous this year, flaming in yellows, reds, oranges, and pale greens. I can hear the heavy wind chimes my son bought dinging and donging over the traffic of Mattis Avenue. It isn't a mast year. The acorn and hickory nuts at Waterfall Glen Forest Preserve we visited this past weekend were scarce. A mast year is when the trees kind of get together and agree to produce lots of food so that some survive, and in the next few years don't produce very many so that insects will starve to death and not come back in as large numbers. It works. So I have a pretty piece of a forest watercolor here with a hare. That's by Tukey Designs on Etsy. And on this page, I've just clipped it together with a regular paper clip. If I decide to put these random pages together, I'll think of something more decorative. I have an old cookbook, and I have made old-fashioned apple butter this year. So I have written out all the parts in this old cookbook in tiny print to say how it's made. And it is interesting. You cook the fruits until they're soft, stirring constantly. Put cooked fruit through a food mill or colander. I used a blender. Some people use food processors. And for a superior smooth butter, sieve the pulp to remove fibrous materials. I did not go that far. Apples, and I skipped a lot of the different fruit butters so that I can concentrate on the apple butter. To prepare the pulp, you peel and slice or quarter. Cook in an equal amount of water, cider, half water and half cider or Concord grape juice, and then additions to the fruit pulp. You can add brown or white sugar. You can make the amount as much as you like. This recipe suggests half as much as the amount of fruit, and I found that to be overly sweet with today's apples on the market, which tend to be pretty sweet compared to a lot of the old-fashioned or heritage varieties. And it recommends using brown if you want a stronger taste and a darker color, which I did. Salt, 1/4 to a 1/2 teaspoon for every gallon of fruit. Spices, this one calls for a mix of ground cinnamon and ground ginger and ground allspice. I add a bit of clove. It adds an unexpected flavor, and it just makes a good mix of spices. So you pick whatever spices that you like and you add them. And you can also use whole spices tied in cheesecloth, but I like the darker color that leaving in all these rich spices adds. And it goes on to tell you how to cook it down. You measure the pulp and sugar. Add the salt, boil rapidly, stir constantly until it gets to the point where it's going plop, plop and splattering on you, then you turn it down. And you continue to cook it, and this is neat because it gives you 3 ways to recognize when the apple butter is done. The first, as it'll almost flake off the spoon, and I'm not quite sure what that means because I haven't had somebody show me what that means. The second way is grandmother used to say, until it is thick enough to spread. And another test for consistency, and this is the one that I find useful, is to pour a tablespoon of the hot butter onto a chilled plate, and if no rim of liquid forms around the edge of the butter, it's ready for canning. That means if you plop down a spoonful and water doesn't ease out the edges, it's ready to can. And then it just gives you the basic canning rules. Sterilize jars and wipe the jar rooms, put on your lids. What is interesting in this old recipe is it says you need to complete the seals unless the closures are self-sealing. In modern lids and rings, they all are self-sealing. This was from the Farm Journal's Freezing and Canning Cookbook, New Revised Edition, which was published as the Revised Edition in 1973. And I have both the older edition and the newer edition, but I have made this recipe a couple of times now, and I really like the results. Now, why do I make apple butter? Well, this is a line from a poem by Danielle Dulsky, posted on her Facebook page November 10th of 2022. She is a writer, and she also hosts workshops on finding the old hag writer within you and deals with archetypes of the feminine. But this particular poem, at least the first couple of lines, really struck home with me. May these longer nights feed us firelight, wolf song, apple-buttered bread, and those wild winter stories of mountain hags, wise children, and weary travelers met by otherworldly creatures on the road. And I can imagine sitting around a fireplace, wrapped in blankets, telling kids fairy tales while drinking hot chocolate and homemade bread buttered with apple butter. So I did also include in these pages wheat germ butter topped loaf that is my recipe, and I make it all the time. It's really pretty simple, but the secret to a butter topped loaf is you slash about a 1/2 inch deep down the length of each loaf after it has gotten nearly doubled, and you tuck pats of butter down the length, sometimes a sprinkle of salt, and then bake as usual. And it turns out with a light yellow colored center seam that's soft and buttery, so it's kind of fun. So I've also included in here one of my favorite fairy tales. I just said which one it is, and that's Snow White and Rose Red, which is a couple of sisters that host a bear over the winter at their fireside, and eventually he turns into, of course, a prince. So I just wanted to give you another way that you can use a journal. Recipes and poems, and then on this one also the little diary entry at the beginning explaining what the fall was like in 2024. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you soon.